This is part 8 of the series. James Edward Smith, June 26, 1990. Smith was put to death in Texas for capital murder. His odd last meal request brought attention to his case. Smith went up to a teller's window at the Union National Life Insurance Company in Houston, Texas on March 7, 1983. Wearing a stocking mask and armed with a revolver, Smith ordered the teller to turn over all the money by sliding the window open and pointing the firearm at her. Smith looked at the district manager of the company, Larry Don Rojas, 44, who had been standing with her, as the teller declined and went behind the filing cabinet. Following Smith's instructions, Rojas took cash out of the cash drawer and gave it to Smith in a plastic bag. Smith told Rojas to come back to the window as he was leaving. As they talked, Rojas begged Smith not to shoot him and started removing a bracelet from his wrist. After that, Smith fired 2 shots, the second of which struck Rojas in the upper left chest. After that, Smith fired 2 shots, the second of which struck Rojas in the upper left chest. After being taken to the hospital, Rojas passed away a few hours later. 2 office workers followed Smith as he departed the premises on foot. After running across the field, they entered an apartment building where Smith started shooting at them. He was being pursued by multiple individuals when he stumbled in the street as he was leaving the complex. He was subsequently handcuffed by a passing detective who had heard what was going on. The gun was discovered in the field and the money was found close by. Smith was detained without bond after being accused of killing Rojas. He tried to escape and fled the courthouse during the juror selection phase of his trial. A few blocks away, an HPD officer apprehended him. A Harris County jury found Smith guilty of capital murder on April 5, 1984, and he was given the death penalty. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld his death sentence in November of 1987. Then, in an effort to hasten his execution, Smith waived his appeals. On June 26, 1990, Smith was executed via lethal injection in the execution chamber at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. He was pronounced dead at 12:31 a.m. In his final statement, he proclaimed his innocence and uttered the Krishna blessing. For his final meal, he ordered a pile of dirt. That, of course, was denied, so he consumed yogurt instead. Michael James Derrick, July 18, 1990. On October 11, 1980, Edward Saunier, 32, picked up Derrick as he was strolling down a street in the Montrose neighborhood. At the victim's residence, he robbed Saunier and fatally stabbed him. Derrick stated he murdered the man in self-defense because he was trying to assay him. The prosecution, however, said that that was not the case, and in fact, the scope of the murder was robbery. His last words were, "I just ask everybody I ever hurt or done anything wrong to just forgive me for whatever wrongs I done to them." He refused his last 2 meals and spent several hours on the telephone speaking with relatives. Lawrence Lee Buxton, February 26, 1991. On September 19, 1980, Buxton and 2 disguised co-conspirators looted a store in West Houston. Joel Slotnick and his 5-year-old kid were told to lie on the floor as soon as they walked into the business. When the kid began to cry, Buxton instructed Slotnick to shut that kid up. He shot 40-year-old Slotnick in the neck on his way out. On the day of his execution, Buxton's last words were, "I'm ready, Warden." As the deadly chemicals took effect, he maintained his gaze on the ceiling. He took several deep breaths and exhaled through his lips. The 38-year-old prisoner made 2 visits with prison chaplains and spoke on the phone with his brother and lawyer the previous day. When placed in a holding cell next to the execution room, he reportedly remained composed, according to prison officials. His last meal consisted of a filet mignon, pineapple upside-down cake, sweet pickles, and a chocolate milkshake. Ignacio Cuevas, May 23, 1991. On July 24, 1974, Cuevas and 2 other prisoners from Huntsville's Waltz unit took 16 hostages, starting the longest prison siege in the country. Hostages Julia Stanley and Elizabeth Beceda were slain in a gunfight along with Rodolfo Dominguez and Fred Gomez Carrasco, who were accomplices to the siege. Cuevas was found guilty under a provision that holds all participants equally accountable, even though he did not shoot either of the women. Harris County prosecutors brought charges against Cuevas in Houston. Cuevas, who was serving a 45-year term for murder at the time of the attempted prison break, chose a last meal of chicken dumplings, steamed rice, sliced bread, black-eyed peas, and iced tea. His last words were, "I'm going to a beautiful place. Okay, Warden, roll 'em." Jerry Joe Bird, June 17, 1991. He was on death row for the murder of an antique gun collector, Victor Harold Trammell. Trammell and his spouse, Jo Ellen, were restrained in January 1974 as their home was looted of $30,000 worth of vintage firearms. Victor Trammell was shot in the heart and the house was set on fire, but Jo Ellen Trammell managed to flee. Later that year, Bird was found guilty and given a sentence. Emmett Corges, Bird's accomplice in the crime, was given a life term in prison in 1974 and passed away in 1982. Bird, a machinist from Oklahoma who had only completed the 8th grade, was previously found guilty of murder in Corpus Christi, Texas in 1956, but in 1961 he was set free. Just a week before his execution, Bird suffered a stroke and spent time in the hospital. His lawyers tried to obtain a commutation of sentence based on his health, but the authorities concluded that even if the inmate was partially paralyzed, he had no mental issues and he understood perfectly why he was being executed. The legislation doesn't allow for mentally ill people to be put to death. When he was asked if he had any last words, he said, "I don't think so. That's all. Go ahead, start things rolling." For his last meal, he ordered chicken, baked potato, and pecan pie. He did not eat the dessert. James Russell, September 19, 1991. He was on death row for the abduction and murder of Thomas Robert Stearns, 24 years old. The victim was shot twice in the head. Stearns was a witness to a robbery that Russell committed 2 years prior at the Radio Shack where Stearns was working. Russell was out of jail on bond at the time of the crime. He didn't have any last words, and for his final meal, he only asked for an apple. G. W. Green, November 12, 1991. He was on death row for a murder committed during a robbery. Green and his accomplices Joseph Stavraji and Glenn Earl Martin invaded John Denson's home. Denson was a juvenile probation officer and reserve deputy sheriff. The actual murderer was Stavraji, who shot Denson in the struggle. Green, however, also tried to convince Stavraji to shoot and kill the officer's wife and 13-year-old daughter, but he refused. Green's last words, "Let's do it, man. Lock and load. Ain't life a bitch?" There are no records of his final meal. Joe Angel Cordova, January 22, 1992. Maisel Williams, 31, was using a payphone on the East Tex Freeway on February 27, 1982, when Cordova, his 16-year-old nephew, and 2 other teenagers spent the evening drinking and smelling paint fumes before kidnapping Williams. Cordova made Williams drive to a forested area and then used a shotgun to shoot him in the chest. After being tried as an adult, his nephew was found guilty of aggravated robbery and given a 15-year prison sentence. A juvenile detention facility received the other accomplices. At 39 years old, Cordova was executed via lethal injection. He had no last words. Cordova gasped for air 3 times and was declared dead at 12:18 a.m. I couldn't find his last meal request or if he had any for that matter. Johnny Frank Garrett, February 11, 1992. Johnny Frank Garrett killed a Catholic nun who resided across the street from him. Garrett was 17 years old on the morning of October 31, 1981, when the murder occurred. Sister Tadia Benz, 76, was essayed, strangled, and killed by Garrett in the St. Francis Convent. Garrett was taken into custody and charged with murder on November 9, 1981. He was found guilty of the crime after a trial. He was detained at Ellis Unit, which housed men on the state of Texas death row at the time and was located north of Huntsville, Texas. His execution date was originally set for January 6, 1992, but Texas Governor Ann Richards granted him a temporary reprieve when Pope John Paul II requested leniency. Following Richards' reprieve, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles heard arguments about whether Garrett should be commuted to life in prison. Nevertheless, by a vote of 17-1, the death sentence was upheld. He was examined by Dr. Dorothy Otnow Lewis, who concluded that his mother, grandmother, and grandfather had abused him as a youngster, resulting in him developing multiple personality disorder. On February 11, 1992, at the age of 28, he was finally put to death by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. He didn't make any final statement, and for his last meal, he only asked for ice cream. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.